Welcome to the third episode of the National Security Science Podcast, titled Salt Life, written and read by Mark Levin.
Hi, my name is Mark Levin. After retiring from the Navy, I worked for 3 years at the Dual Access Radiographic Hydrodynamic Test Facility, better known as DART. It was a great place to work. While I was there, I was the operations team leader, and as the team leader, I managed all the technicians who operated both accelerators, the technicians who performed maintenance and repaired all mechanical equipment, and the mechanical engineering team who designed and upgraded the accelerator systems. Today, I would like to share what it was like to live and work on board an Ohio-class submarine. I'll discuss what it was like to get underway, what life is like for several months underwater, and finally how great it is to return home.
The National Security Science Podcast is a spin-off of National Security Science Magazine at Los Alamos National Laboratory. We bring you stories from the lab's weapons program, stories that show how innovative science and engineering are key to keeping America safe. Or, as we like to say, better science equals better security. I'm Brenda Fleming, your host and also the art director of the magazine, which you can read at lanl.gov/magazine. Please send any feedback to magazine@lanl.gov. Today, we bring you the third episode of a three-part series, each episode highlighting a different branch of our nuclear triad, or the land, air, and sea-based components of America's nuclear deterrent. If you missed the past two episodes, be sure to check them out. The first episode was a story by B-2 stealth bomber pilot Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Steeves, and our second story drew from interviews with Major Nicholas Edwards, a Los Alamos Air Force Fellow and Missileer. This week, we cover the third sea-based branch of the nuclear triad with a story from our October 2018 issue titled Salt Life. Written and read by Navy veteran and former Los Alamos employee Mark Levin, this story will give some insight into what it's like to serve on board an Ohio-class submarine that has the ability to launch Los Alamos-designed nuclear weapons. And if you've ever wondered about the food options on a sub, Mark gets into that too.
"8 a.m., Hood Canal, Puget Sound, Washington State. When the weather is cooperating, officer of the deck is the best job on the planet, and that is my assignment today on board the USS Nebraska nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed Ohio-class submarine. Standing exposed on the bridge at the very top of the submarine's giant tower, my job is to drive the submarine out of our home port in Naval Base Kitsap, through the watery network west of Seattle that empties into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and then into the Pacific Ocean where the boat will slip underwater. I feel an underlying excitement that is rivaled only by the feeling returning home will give me 70 days from now. I feel alive. Driving the submarines means I am responsible for the safe navigation of the ship. I steer the ship by giving rudder orders to the helm, the person who turns the wheel to position the rudder. Because the helm sits below deck, and I am on the bridge above the deck, separated by about 25 feet. The experience of driving the submarine is often compared to blindfolding the driver of a car, while a passenger stands through the sunroof and instructs the blindfolded driver how fast to go and which direction to turn. I heard one prolonged blast on the ship's whistle and we are underway, embarking on a 10-week strategic deterrence mission, carrying 24 Trident II D5 submarine-launched ballistic missiles armed with Los Alamos-designed nuclear warheads. The Nebraska will prowl the depths of the ocean, its exact location unknown to everyone but its crew. Our mission is to remain hidden at sea with our SLBMs, so as to deter a nuclear attack on the United States by demonstrating to other countries that the United States has an assured second strike capability, a survivable system for carrying out a retaliatory nuclear attack. Looking down the top of the submarine's black steel hull, stretching ahead of me and behind me, totaling nearly 2 football fields in length, we approach our dive location, the point at which we will submerge, on time. To dive the ship, crew members must rig the submarine for dive, which means each component that is exposed to water must be positioned and sealed correctly, checked by an enlisted person, and checked again by an officer. Because this rig is so huge, the Nebraska started its rig yesterday. I began rigging the bridge for dive with an enlisted lookout. We have done this task many times together, sometimes even in the dark, so we move quickly. As I climb down the long vertical ladder from the bridge into the belly of the submarine, I check the bottom hatch and announce, "Last man down, hatch secure." This is a carryover from World War II, a time when diesel submarines spent a great deal of time on the surface recharging their batteries, and the diesel submarines would need to dive quickly once an airplane or surface ship was spotted to avoid depth charges. "Last man down, hatch secured" told the control room it was safe to dive. Not the same connotation today, but cool nonetheless. As the submarine descends slowly below the surface, the crew shifts quietly into its new normal, the underway routine. As we descend, I feel the boat rolling gently in the surface waves and know the slight rocking will dissipate as we lower to patrol depth. But even deep underwater, a submarine moves more than most people think, and I can recall multiple times an entire crew has been seasick, but thankfully today is not that type of day. My next step is the sonar shack, a tiny room with no lights. Behind the closed door, 5 watchmen monitor for slight changes on sonar displays. These glowing electronic screens graphically display underwater sounds that are picked up by the boat's sensors. Sonar technicians can also use headphones to listen to the raw sounds. The crew relies on these displays to provide clues about the surrounding aquatic environment. Sonar, short for sound navigation and ranging, is essentially the eyes and ears of the submerged boat. I've spent years developing my skills at reading sonar displays, but our sonar technicians have far superior abilities. Despite today's modern navigation equipment, one of the best direction-finding instruments on board is the experienced sonar technicians here. Before departure, the officers and navigation team have a good idea of where the patrol is headed. The mission is not necessarily to lurk ominously offshore of other countries, but rather to remain undetected in the depths of the ocean. The navigation team updates the number of miles traveled each day. There's not much interest from the rest of the crew in total miles traveled or our location. Most crew members are content to know we are somewhere undetected in the 64 million square mile Pacific Ocean. By contrast, subs that depart from the base in Kings Bay, Georgia, patrol the smaller 41 million square mile Atlantic Ocean. Of course, no matter our location, one crucial part of our mission always remains the same: to launch nuclear missiles only when authorized by the President. If ordered, the 24 Trident II D5 missiles on board this sub are launched underwater, and after breaking the surface, travel at 15,000 miles per hour to reach nearly anywhere in the world. We have the power to destroy an adversary's military infrastructure and everything in between. As the sea-based delivery system of America's nuclear triad, Ohio-class subs have a greater chance of survival from a first strike. Once an SSBN goes to sea, it's a high-priority target for other nations, so staying undercover is crucial for our safety. I've always felt everyone on board understood the gravity of the mission and accepted responsibility for his or her part of the mission. I came to terms with my role before my first patrol nearly a decade ago. I'm ready to play my part in launching a nuclear weapon if asked. Authorization to launch would come in an emergency action message from the President. The 2 junior officers would decode. Junior officers have just completed Naval nuclear training pipeline and submarine school and are reporting to their first submarines. In order to launch, the 2 junior officers, the executive officer, and the commanding officer must agree that the message is authentic. The commanding officer will then authorize the launch, and the weapons officer will pull the trigger that launches the missile. Only some of the nation's nuclear-armed submarines are on alert, ready to launch nuclear missiles at any given time. However, those not on alert are still fulfilling a vital mission because they can transition to alert status within 24 hours. Alternate reality. Submarines don't have windows, so crew members have no sense of time of day. Not that windows would help tell time in the dark depths of the ocean. Instead, our day is illuminated by fluorescent lights and structured by 8-hour rotations punctuated by meals. For example, I'm on watch for 8 hours. I perform routine maintenance or have free time for 8 hours, and theoretically I can sleep for 8 hours. The meals are the biggest clue to the time of the day. We eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and everyone's favorite, mid-rats. Mid-rats, short for midnight rations, is a midnight meal and consists mostly of leftovers from lunch and dinner. Corn dogs are universally accepted as the ideal mid-rats treat, and morale peaks when corn dogs are served. If the word spreads quickly enough, some crew members will wake up in the middle of the night just to eat corn dogs. Our submarine's half-dozen cooks prepare these 4 meals in a broom closet-sized galley, or kitchen, using only a grill, 2 ovens, 2 fryers, and 4 steam kettles. The cooks serve food cafeteria style to the 140 members of the enlisted crew, who must eat quickly because the seating area has only a 36-person capacity. The 15 officers eat in the 10-person wardroom where food is served family style with dishes passed around the table. Although locations are separate, the food is the same for all crew members. The food taken on board before we are underway is all that's available for 70 days. To remain undetected, the submarine isn't restocked at any point during patrol. Fresh fruits, vegetables, and milk last about 7 days. Eggs are wax-coated, stored in a frigid room with ventilation fans and cooling coils, and supposedly last 45 days. In my opinion, you are rolling the dice if you choose the egg selection at breakfast after day 14. After all the fresh fruit has been consumed, the frozen and canned stash is open, at which point food becomes known only by its color. Question: what vegetable is that? Answer: that is the green option. The green option is most likely broccoli, asparagus, spinach, but it doesn't matter because all green vegetables are boiled into the same tasteless slime. Fortunately, adding hot sauce makes anything edible. Hot sauce is religion on board a submarine. Procuring hot sauce for the officers is entrusted to the newest officer and is a very important duty. Before departure, the new officer must figure out what flavors and levels of hotness will ensure the morale of the other officers remains high. A smart procuring officer asks what everyone prefers. A cocky one may assume he knows best. If the officer chooses poorly, he will be endlessly hassled until he turns the job over to the next new guy. It's a learning experience. Thankfully, on this patrol, we are fully stocked with sriracha and my favorite, Frank's Red Hot. Law of finite happiness. Today and every day while underway, I wear the uniform set by the commanding officer, navy blue U.S. Navy issue coveralls. My A6 running shoes are the only optional part of the uniform, along with the University of Illinois t-shirt underneath my coveralls, but no one can see that. Shoe choice is based on comfort, durability, and style. Above all, the shoe must be able to survive the patrol, which means surviving oil, water, and solvents that might leak from equipment. Hats are not required, but we are allowed to wear them. Most crew members wear ball caps of their favorite sports teams, which says a lot about people and where they're from. The submarine receives limited radio messages. The messages that do come sometimes include sports scores. The folks relaying the scores do not always share our enthusiasm for this holy grail of message traffic and frequently cause undue heartache when scores are incorrectly reported. Ball caps can also invoke the law of finite happiness during playoff season. The law of finite happiness is a fact of human interaction and occurs on all submarines only after all watertight hatches have been closed. The law dictates that only a finite amount of happiness is stored inside each person on board a submarine. When one submariner steals happiness from another, he becomes stronger and the other person becomes weaker. The law commands that submariners have a thick skin and not show emotion. Basically, if you don't mind, it don't matter. For example, if one submariner mocks another about his hat choice, the submariner being pestered cannot show any signs of it bothering him, or the tormenting will continue, and the person doing the mocking will tell everyone else so they can join in. Semper Gumby. Living quarters on board an Ohio-class sub are the largest the submarine fleet has to offer, routinely called the Cadillac of the submarines, but they are still small. Enlisted quarters are located in the submarine's missile compartment, almost as if crew berthing was an afterthought in submarine design. 3 racks or beds are stacked on top of one another, and 9 racks are nestled between large metal missile launch tubes. Rack curtains, which are pulled across the length of the rack, provide some privacy, although they do not block sound. Everything a crew member needs for an underway, including toiletries, clothing, and uniforms, must fit in a rack pan underneath the mattress. Careful planning is required to fit everything you could potentially need for 70 days. There is no convenience store underway, so whatever you forgot, you have to live without or get from someone else. Officer quarters, also known as staterooms, although that word makes them sound more glamorous than they are located in the front of the crew quarters. Although I am fortunate to have more space than the enlisted men, I still share a cramped room with 2 other officers. Although the Nebraska does have a large movie and library collection, many sailors bring their own entertainment. My rack pan is filled with music and books. To save space, I've opted for digital media, listening to songs on my iPod, and reading my favorite Joseph Conrad novels on a tablet. I've seen crew members install an Xbox and television in their cramped sleeping area. They'd rather have their own video games, even though it means sleeping curled up in a small ball on one end of the bed. Sleep is the most precious commodity on board the submarine, and submarine culture is steeped in sleep lore. Some legendary junior officers have somehow managed to write themselves off the watch bill, not when they really need it, of course, and claim to have spent 24 hours on the rack on a submarine. I have never experienced this bliss. The flip side is hot racking, when two enlisted crew members have to share a bed, but not at the same time. When one person is on watch, the other person is sleeping in the bed, and then they switch. Imagine doing that for 2 months at a time, not to mention also having to share a rack pan. Hot racking is definitely not the norm, but depending on the mission, more crew might be required for training reasons or for support operations. Sleep is sometimes interrupted when something breaks on the ship and the crew has to perform repairs. There's not a deep-sea tow truck to bring a submarine back to port, so it's all hands on deck when something goes wrong. Problems can range from a light that stopped working to a complete loss of communications. Semper Gumby is a phrase commonly heard around the submarine. Loosely translated, it means always be flexible. In the more than 3 years, total amount of undersea time during my career I've spent underway, something has always broken, but I've never once thought the crew couldn't fix it. Each crew on board a submarine has specialists, such as sonar technicians, radio men, and nuclear mechanics, who can solve just about any problem imaginable. Homecoming. We begin counting down the days left on patrol when we have 24 days to go. Some of the guys have fashioned a model of our boat out of discarded parts and duct tape. We hung the unwieldy reproduction on missile tube 24. The next day, the model moves to tube 23 and so on. Kind of an advent calendar, so to speak. The anticipation is really apparent about a week before we return to port. As an officer, I worry about keeping the guys on task so we can get safely home, but the last week always seems to fly by, and finally it is homecoming day. We surface a few hours from Bangor, and every crew member is assigned a specific job until we dock. The crew is in high spirits because pulling into the pier with family waiting is the best feeling. Unfortunately, that is not the case today. The boat has some maintenance issues that crew members must fix, and families have been asked not to wait on the pier. I am one of the last to leave the sub, but my wife is waiting when the bus drops me off in the same desolate parking lot where this whole adventure started at 2 a.m. 70 days ago. I feel satisfied with my last patrol and what I have accomplished during this 3-year tour. I am fully qualified and fairly proficient as an officer of the deck. I am a qualified nuclear engineer and have successfully trained my replacement. My job is complete and I'm ready to begin my next assignment, shift engineer at the Nuclear Power Training Unit in Charleston, South Carolina. As my wife drives me home, she talks about everything that has happened in her world during the past 10 weeks, and I feel myself slipping back into a normal life. We don't talk much about my patrol, which is fine by me. I always thought if no one ever knew where we were or what we did, it was a successful patrol. I don't need praise from the public or from politicians. Our admirals have always provided all the praise we need. The submarine community is closed to the outside, and I like it that way. Most of the crew also feel the same way. Maybe submariners are a strange breed, but it works for our mission. On the highway, we pass a pickup truck with a Salt Life window sticker, and I laugh. If submarines had windows, that sticker would be perfect.
A very special thanks to Mark Levin for sharing this story, and thank you for listening to the National Security Science Podcast, stories from the National Security Science Magazine. Again, you can find the full magazine at lanl.gov or lanl.gov/magazine. And remember, better science equals better national security.